All right. Well, you're not going to believe this, but remember how I said I was done with the Old Testament? There's one book I forgot to preach on, so I was looking it all over. I skipped Ruth. Actually, I checked it out, and we did do Micah. He's the guy that rowed the boat ashore. So, I wish I would have spent more time in Micah, but we are moving on. We're going to do Ruth tonight. We've got communion, and then that ends August, and we'll roll into September, October, November, and December. And I was thinking about doing a gospel for the second season of the year. What do you think? Maybe I'll either do Matthew or Luke. I think we've done Mark and John. So, over the 4 years, we've been studying a lot of the Bible together. So, kind of exciting. Ruth is an interesting book. It was written somewhere between 1350 and 1050 BC. It's kind of a fun book because, it's a book dedicated to a woman. And that doesn't happen very often in the Bible, yes? Esther and Ruth are two books that are all about a special woman, and Ruth is a special woman, absolutely. People get all hung up about women in the Bible and women in the ministry and stuff like that, and I don't know. In Genesis 1:27 says God created them in his image, male and female, he created man. So I don't know why we tend to put women in a different category in the ministry. Well, because of Timothy, that Timothy passage. I do not allow a woman to teach. But in that passage, the word for allow is at this moment in the Greek. The tense is the present tense at this moment. And so I kind of look at the context where you have secular prophetesses coming in full of their personalities, and Paul's going, wait a minute, let's slow down and do things decently and in order. You go throughout the Bible and you see powerful women teachers, ministers. So, I don't know, that's why Presbyterians endorse women in the ministry. And if you don't like it, argue with somebody else about it, okay? Actually, I don't mind talking to you about it because we all want to be true to the Scriptures, okay? That's very important. And so, just where I'm coming from, I'm covering it real flippantly and quickly, but Ruth, a woman in the Bible, she has a powerful ministry. And what's amazing, it's a Gentile woman who married a Jew, okay? We start off the book of Ruth with a famine in the land. And this family's from Bethlehem. And you know what Bethlehem means? House of bread. Interesting that in the house of bread, it's empty. And so these folks have to move somewhere else, and they go to a place in the land of Moab. Now, Moab has an interesting history. That's where Lot, remember when Sodom and Gomorrah took place, and Lot was running for his life, and he had his two daughters, and they watched the land be decimated. And so they assumed, we're the only 3 people left on earth, so let's get our dad drunk and build an ancestry. Okay? So it was out of that ancestral situation that the Moabites came. And I'm quite certain that the Israelites would have never missed the opportunity to remind the Moabites how they started, which would cause the Moabites to treat them not very hospitably. Like when they were leaving Egypt, the Israelites are leaving Egypt. And the Moabites said, you're not moving through our land. This caused there to be quite a bit of strife. Okay? In fact, when they were coming through the land, the Moabites hired Balaam to curse them. Fascinating story in the Bible. Balaam gets up to curse, and God says, oh, no, you don't. You bless him. And so he blesses them, and the Moabites are going, what are you doing? We hired you to curse him. You're not doing what we paid you to do. We'll pay you more. Do it right. He says, I'm going to say whatever God tells me to say. Boom. Continues to bless him. Also, one more time, the Moabites, they seduced a number of people from Israel to worship Baal and to get involved in their sexuality and to intermarry, and that became a snare to Israel. So it's interesting that folks who are hungry in Israel would find their way to Moab, because that wouldn't be the place to go. But when you're hungry, you do desperate stuff. Okay? And I mean that in the sense when somebody's starving to death. Like, let's take the Somalians. You know those pirates that go out into the ocean? Why don't we just mow them down? Typical guy statement, right? And then one day, I listened to one of the pirates say, well, we were sitting in our home dying while the rest of the world passes by in their affluence. And we thought, I wonder if maybe we can feed our families. First time I'd ever seen piracy through those eyes. When you're desperate, you'll do anything to feed yourself and your family. So they go to a place that they probably shouldn't go. And while they were there, the two Naomi's boys married Moabite women. You shouldn't marry Moabite women, all right? But they did. And it's kind of interesting for me. I'll hear stories about how the Irish Catholic married the Baptist girl, and both families shunned them until the grandkids came along. You know, and we have that tendency to marry incorrectly. And some of you know the pain of marrying the wrong religion, the wrong person. The values are different. You know, oh, we're in love. Well, I don't know. That's what I'm always telling my son and my daughter. I'm going to love whoever you marry, but I'm going to love these people a little bit more, okay? Church-going Christians. And she knows I'm joking, but the truth of the matter is when you date, ask. Are you a Christian? My daughter told me a funny story. She said, you know, I had this crush on this boy, and he asked me out, and I went out with him, and he was talking about the demons that he experiences. And she's like, oh, demons. Okay. Nice having coffee with you. You know, she has some values in place. She knows demons. No. I asked my son, you're dating. Is she a Christian? Well, I don't know. Why don't you know? This is an important piece. Because you're playing with your future spouse, possibly. And if you fall in love with somebody who doesn't have your values, you go through the rest of your life wishing that they would come to know the goodness of your Lord. Okay? And hopefully they're going to be saved under your covering. There's Bible verses that suggest that's a possibility. But that's not the same as the two of you come into a situation, it's a famine in your world, and you get on your knees together and you grab hands and you pray hard. Wow. Now that's something special. And that's what God wants for all of us. That's why in 2 Corinthians it says, don't be unequally yoked. Because usually what happens is the non-believer pulls the believer away from their faith. Okay? And unfortunately, you wish it'd be the other way around. But let's avoid that and just pick the right person. Those of you who are looking for somebody, okay? All right. Yes, I was staring at somebody. So here's what happens. These guys marry Moabite women, and then these guys die. So now you have a widow with two daughter-in-laws. And this is a bad situation. And so Naomi hears, oh, God's blessing my homeland, so I think I should go back And this is what she says, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead, her sons, and with me. May you find rest. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going back to my country. You ladies, stay here. You're a Moabite ladies. Find yourself a Moabite guy and be Moabites. Don't come with me because God has withdrawn from me. She doesn't want to bring misfortune on her daughter-in-laws. In fact, she says, for the hand of the Lord has gone forth against me. Have you ever been in that spot where you feel like God was punishing you? It's painful. Does God punish us? No. Jesus took the punishment on the cross. Does God allow awkward circumstances into your life? Yes. Was God the one who killed your spouse? Probably not. But the natural world happens, and when it happens, that's when the supernatural gets invited in to bring healing and take us on a different path. And if you're somebody who doesn't have that eternal perspective, and the calamity happens of that magnitude in this world, it can be the end of your relationship with God. I know lots of people who were never emotionally able to move forward after the death of their child or their spouse's divorce or situations that happened. I lost my fortune, and they sat in the corner and complained about it the rest of their lives. Well, there's a whole life to go forward with. Yeah, it stinks that it happened to you. But why don't we invite God to come on in and move forward? Because the truth of the matter is, the hand of the Lord isn't against you. And he might have let something come into your life, but that's time to activate God. Well, there's two daughter-in-laws. Orpha said, mother-in-law, nice knowing you. And Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or turn back from following you, for where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus may the Lord do to me, and worse, if anything but death parts you and me. Wow. Could you imagine someone coming along? That ought to be in your wedding vows, huh? That'll be something. Causes you to wonder what kind of a mother-in-law Naomi was. She's the kind that says, I perceive myself to be cursed. I don't want you to get my cooties. Okay? I want you to go and not be dragged down by an old mother-in-law. While it sounds like she's pushing them away, she means it for their good. And so, look at Ruth, though. Just this powerful commitment. Naomi must have had a special relationship with her. And here's what's really powerful. In the book of Ruth, God is mentioned 25 times. Okay? And in 1:20, this is what Naomi says. Do not call me, she goes home to Bethlehem. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, which means bitterness. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. God's name is Yahweh. I have a connection to you, a commitment to you, a covenant with you. And it's based on my grace and mercy. Well, that's not the word she uses. She doesn't have that kind of experience with God. She calls him the Almighty. We call him the man upstairs. We have our ways of referring to that distant God. And that's not what God wants to be, and that's not who he named himself in the Bible. And so we're going to see a progression of her situation right now. Okay? She still acknowledges God, but she's got a little bit of bitterness towards him right now. And I'm going to say, if you're having a fight with God, an arm wrestle with God, that's okay. It's okay to have a spat with God. It's okay to tell him how you feel. I was with somebody last week. They were telling God how they felt, and wow. I usually don't use those terms, I usually don't think that way, but it was a soul-to-soul exchange with God saying, I feel hurt, and I think you could do something about it, and you choose not to do something about it, and I don't understand, and I don't like it, and it goes against the promises that you've made in your word, and I'm mad at you. And you say, all right, let's go forward now and see what we can build off of that. You see, your circumstances, they can bring you to God, or they can drive you away from God. And I think all of us have to make that decision. What's it going to be? And I think that you can even be a Christian in the church where you're supposed to be, and you're acknowledging the Almighty, but you have a little attitude. Why'd you allow that to happen? Why haven't you answered this important prayer? And you sit in the pew day after week, after month, after year, maybe after decade, and you never get healed. And that's not what God wants. Okay? You keep him close enough to remind him that he failed you, but you don't bring him far enough in to heal and then restore you. So, they go back to Bethlehem, and it says that it was time for the harvest, and they were going to glean. Now, you know what gleaning is? I just want you to understand how much God cares about the poor. Have you noticed I'm always talking about God caring about the poor? It's not because it's a big deal to me. It's because every book we're in, God talks about it. And after you read the Bible enough times, you start to realize, I notice a theme here. It seems to care about the poor. And it was built into your business. When you did the harvest, you were to leave some for the oppressed, the foreigner, and the poor. You weren't supposed to make sure that you clean up everything because God wanted you, business person, to make sure that in your business you provided for those who didn't have a business, those who were less fortunate. And so it was called gleaning. And the people would come along and pick up the fruit and the stuff that wasn't totally taken away. Now, I think it's a powerful realization of how much God puts a responsibility on us and how much he really cares about those who don't have. And so Naomi says to Ruth, go see what you can make happen. And she goes into the field of Boaz. Now, Boaz is special for two reasons. One, it's the name of my dog. Okay? And two, and by the way, at home I have Boaz and Ruth. Okay? This is a special book. And number two, Boaz is a relation to Naomi. So, here's what happens. When you go through the Bible, if you lose your husband, your family is responsible for picking up the pieces. If you're young enough to still have children, then this becomes your woman. Okay? So you better hope that your brothers marry pretty ladies. Or nice ladies is probably a better way to say it. Kind ladies. Let me get out of this hole real fast. God's providence is that he's setting up to where all the fields that she could go, she goes to Boaz's field. And she doesn't know that. This wasn't calculated. And here's the cool thing, is God has his eye on you, and he knows how to guide you. If you're listening, if you're open, if you're willing to take a risk, you're going to be shocked at how many times the supernatural takes place because you went to the right instead of the left, or the left instead of the right. Can't tell you how many times somebody said to me, I wasn't going to come to church today, and I did, and God spoke directly to me. Okay? So if you're willing to go where God prods you, you're going to have a God possibility. So she goes to a field. It happens to be a relative of Naomi. And Boaz is a cool guy. He says, who is this woman? And this is what they say. I heard about all that you've done for your mother-in-law after the death of your husband. It's all been reported to me how you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth, and you came to a people that you did not previously know. See, her reputation has preceded her, that you're a woman of integrity, that you have compassion, that you're willing to associate with us. That's her reputation. And so he's taking care of Ruth. He's saying, all right, give her more food, send food home to her mother-in-law. And he says this, may the Lord reward your work and your wages be full from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. Friends, when you decide to put yourself under the Lord's covering, wow. The wings of the Lord. I had fun. There's so many references of the wings of protection and of healing, of your defense. Even the Lord Jesus talks about the wings of the mother hen that want to cover the little ones. Okay? This is a special place where we're under the shadow of his wings. And that's what he's praying for her. So, Boaz, he's the man that God uses to show compassion to a hurting person. And it caused me to wonder, are you one of those people that God uses to restore somebody's dignity? Are you one of those people that cares for the needs and protects those who can't protect themselves? You know, I was in New York City the last 3 days. It's so interesting. You're walking the streets. It's amazing. It's so full of people and life and stuff. And there were these guys, and they had these little podiums in a box for the homeless. And, you know, are you going to put something in the box or not? It's the question. And this guy looks at me and he says, man, the folks out here need you. And he reaches out his hand and he gives me this handshake that it was empowering. Okay? Folks setting aside their time to care for the homeless, to bless other people's lives. Okay? And I'm thinking about this because the fact of the matter is, are you that person in somebody else's life? Are you showing God's character? Are you filled with God's Spirit? Are you following God's promptings and callings? Because what does Naomi think of God? He's against me. He's the Almighty, the guy that causes good and calamity, and I'm getting the calamity. But suddenly Boaz enters her world, and Boaz changes her relationship from Almighty to Yahweh. Boaz is the person that reintroduces her to the God of mercy and grace. I don't know. Caused me to stop and look over my calendar and ponder my relationships and my interactions with people. Is that you? Is that occurring in your life? Is that intentional? Well, interesting stuff is redeem is used 20 times in the book of Ruth. You see, Boaz is going to redeem Naomi's property, and he's going to return to Naomi value and fulfillment. At the end of the book, she goes from being somebody who was out of life to restored to life. Okay? And it's kind of interesting. Now, we're going to get into some dicey stuff here. Okay? You got a mother-in-law that's strategizing for Ruth how to get a man. Now, I don't know about you, but I remember when I was dating, the guys would get together and we would decide, okay, what song do you put on the radio when she's in the car? Okay? You going to wear those shoes? I wouldn't wear those shoes, okay? You know what I'm talking about. It's a big deal. And so Naomi, mother-in-law, is strategizing on how Ruth can be with Boaz. And in chapter 7, verse 3, I just learned this, and I feel awkward telling you this, but when it's uncover his feet, it's a little bit more intimate than that. That's a polite way of talking about intimacy. And that's when she says in verse 9, spread your covering over me. And I like the symmetry here. Spread your covering. It's a marriage invitation. It's a family invitation. It's a spiritual invitation. And really, that's what marriage is about. Okay? That's what friendships are about, minus the intimacy. That's what our relationship with the people around us are supposed to be, that they get under our covering. I was reading about George Mueller. It's a famous story. You've probably heard it 12 times. He had 5 people on his list that he prayed for to meet Jesus, and one happened immediately, another one happened 2 months later, another one happened 10 years later, another one happened 40 years later. 52 years he prayed for this one guy, and then George Mueller died. And then the guy became a Christian. You see, that guy was under his covering. Now, are you praying intentionally for somebody's life? Are you involved in other people's worlds? Is somebody the recipient of your God-inspired mercy? Because it's real easy to go through this life and make it all about me, myself, and I. It's only when we lift up our eyes and say, God, show me the opportunities. Then he shows you, well, that's a little bit inconvenient. If I do that, then I can't afford to do this. And it's decision time. Are you going to be a blessing or not? Remember what we talked about last week? Our purpose is you are blessed to be a blessing. Are you being a blessing? Well, Boaz is excited. He says, you've shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men. Okay? He's an older guy. He's got the hot-looking Moabite. Okay, maybe her motives aren't 100% pure, but are any of ours? Okay? And maybe his kindness made her say, wow, I wish I could be with somebody like that. And maybe her reputation of being an amazing woman made him say, I wish I could have a woman like that. And guess what? God ordained that to happen. And you know what's funny is, this is God ordained because they get together, and it's kind of funny. He goes into there's somebody that should be the redeemer ahead of Boaz, and Boaz wants Ruth, but she's available for somebody else, and Naomi's property is up for grabs, and so who's not going to say, oh, I'd like to have some property? So he goes, all right, there's this property available. I'd like to take it, but you get the first dibs. He goes, I'll take it. He goes, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, there's an old lady and her Moabite daughter that comes with the property. I don't really need the property right now. So Boaz moves in. Ruth becomes his wife. And this is what they say to her. This is what they say. They say that the name of the deceased will not be cut off from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. Okay? Talking about a legacy, right? May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel. Now, do you know who they're going to have? They're going to have this David comes. I think they're the great-grandparents of David. Now, do you get that? The legacy, who built the house of Israel, they prophesy over Ruth, and she becomes that person that brings into the world David's line, and they got some Moabite, non-Israelite in Jesus' genealogy. Okay? And she gave birth to a son. And you realize the story is not about redemption of property, it's the redemption of people. It's powerful stuff. May he also be to you a restorer of life. What's Jesus about? Restoring life. Okay? And she says, you're for you, daughter-in-law, you're better than 7 sons. Makes me wonder, what would your in-laws say about you? Would they refer to you as, man, you're better to me than my own kids? Because when we're Christians, we should have that extra spark, that extra love, that extra compassion, that extra patience, that little bit extra. So that you become the favorite. Not so that you're the favorite, so that your faith can be established in the family. Well, God changed deprivation into the restoration of life. And I want to say this obscure woman, Ruth, she became part of the world history. David's great-grandson, okay? Jesus' lineage. What happened to the other daughter? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. The difference? This woman intentionally aligned herself with God and his people. And I want to say something heavy. What I'm saying is Ruth has eternal ramifications. And if you and I are willing to associate with the Lord and cling to his people and go in his direction, you and I, by our associations, will have eternal ramifications to people around us. We also will impact eternity. The message for Naomi is don't give up on God. She might have got mad at him, but she didn't give up on him, and God turned her deprivation into full-on restoration.